Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your video. Just a quick plea, subscribe to my channel please. If you haven't done it already, subscribe. Tell your friends, subscribe. Thanks. Bank account. Let's have a think about this. You could think of the revs in an engine like a bank account. It's all to do with energy or power, commodities, whatever you want. We could think of it in financial terms. But basically, when you're driving a car, it all works by basically a tug of war. The world around us is acting upon the car and is trying to either accelerate us forwards or backwards, and then you've got an engine which is rotating a gearbox which is trying to pull the car around. Now, let's say gravity is pulling us down, this car on a hill, it's pulling us down and therefore backwards, and it's pulling us with a force of 400 pounds. So let's pretend gravity has spent 400 pounds to pull us backwards. If we spent 400 pounds in forward motion, they would cancel each other out and the vehicle would stay still on the hill, as we have here. So 400 pounds in each direction, we are stationary. As soon as one of them wins over the other, you will either go forwards or backwards. So as I come up with the clutch, I spend a bit more. And if I spend more than the hill, I go forwards. If I don't spend as much, I go backwards. Spend the same amount, I stay completely stationary. It is exactly the same as a game of tug of war. When you think about a clutch and the accelerator, they are two separate things. And you could think of the accelerator as Gavin, who goes to work and he earns money, and he puts that money in a bank account. Okay, so here is the money that Gavin earns and he puts into the bank account. We could say, to go back to what we were talking about before, because remember this is basically an engine and an engine is a resource, well so is a bank account, it is a resource. So I could have an agreement with my bank manager, well Gavin could, not me obviously, I'm none the wiser. But Gavin could have an agreement with the bank manager that he will never get below £600 in the bank account. Never get below it, otherwise the bank manager can come round and shoot his cat or something. So, Jeeves has got a trust fund. He said, don't worry, I will ensure that the money in the bank account never gets below 800 RPM, and if it does, I will put some extra in to get it back up to 800. Gavin goes to work and he earns money. He puts more money into the bank account. So as you push the accelerator, you put money into the bank account, and the rev counter on the engine just purely displays how much money you have in the bank account. Paula, Gavin's wife, is the clutch. Now she spends a percentage of the bank account. If she were to go to a cash point, she can't say give me £80, but what she can do is she can look at the balance in the bank account, say 800, and say, oh, I need 10% of that. So she goes doot doot pum, and she gets £80. Jeeves would then immediately put that £80 back in because that's what he's paid for. But as you can see, the money that's in the bank account and the amount of money that Gavin's wife can spend are related in ways, but not directly. If Paula was going to spend money on acceleration and she needed to spend £400 on the hill, like here, she needed to spend that £400. If she only had £800 in the bank account, she would need a 50% bite. If she had twice as much money in the bank account, she would need half the bite size. If she had £4,000 in the bank account, she would need only 10% bite. Okay, so as you can see, the amount of money in the bank account does not necessarily mean that the vehicle will go faster when you are playing with a clutch. All it is a resource, and Paula can then decide to spend how much of the bank account she wants to spend. That's what's happening inside. Problem comes though, if you remember from the video that I showed you in the gearbox, is that Jeeves, if it gets below 800 RPM, he squirts extra hard, and if it gets below 600, he walks off in a strop because he's got cramp. Now, if I came along and I had £800 in my bank account, Paula needed a 50% bite to get that £400, that would mean that we take £400 out of the bank account, which means the bank account gets below 600. Jeeves has walked off in a strop. One dead cat. The cat gets shot. Okay, so we can't have a 50% bite. If you get too big a percentage and the revs drop below 600, the engine stalls. So you've got to be careful how big a bite you get, because if you get too big, you stall the engine. So it is actually a balancing act. You need to push money into the bank account, and remember, put money in first before you spend it. So you push the accelerator to raise your revs, then you get a bite to start spending. And the bite size that you get decides how much is transferred across to the gearbox, and that speeds up the rate of the gearbox. So the actual bite size actually equates to the speed that the vehicle accelerates. And if it's accelerating too fast for you, then push the clutch down a little bit because you've got too big a bite. Now, what about an automatic? An automatic is just a fancy way of transferring energy from the engine to the gearbox. The gearbox itself operates in pretty much the same manner, but it's the clutch that is the different thing in an automatic. In a manual, you have your clutch pedal that joins one disc to another. In an automatic, what you've actually got is a reservoir of oil and two fans. So here's a desk fan. Now we all know that if you have a fan, it rotates and it blows air that way. But if I were to turn it around and then go and blow into the fan, it would turn the fan backwards. You've probably tried this with desk fans yourself. So you just go and spin them up and they'll spin the opposite direction. In an automatic, basically you've got two fans. One fan connected to the engine, so as you spin up the engine the fan gets faster, and that would blow oil across from the engine towards the gearbox. And inside there's another fan, and as the oil gets pushed across, it turns that fan, and that motion of turning the fan means that the gearbox turns, and therefore it all becomes exactly the same as the manual. So the difference is you've got a contained unit with oil in it, and as you spin up the engine, the oil gets pushed across, which turns another fan, effectively. Now if we then stopped the car so that the fan on the gearbox isn't rotating, it's just oil going through fans. So even if the engine spun up a bit, yes, the pressure would get bigger inside the clutch mechanism, but ultimately you're not causing any wear or tear because you're just sloshing oil around, so you're not burning the clutch away. So that's the advantage. But if you remember, there is no direct link. So in an automatic, you have to spin up the engine to build up the pressure to then start moving the fan or moving the gearbox. But in a manual, because they are physically touching, when you speed up the engine, it immediately speeds up the gearbox. So a manual car is more responsive than an automatic. And you've got lots of different settings that you can have. You've got your park, which basically locks the gearbox, stops it moving. You've got reverse neutral drive, sport. Sport, all that does, actually, that just holds a lower gear for you for a while, that's all. It doesn't make the engine any more powerful, it just changes what gear you pick. So whereas normally you might be driving along in second gear, it'll just stay in first for a bit longer. Because what that does is it raises the revs on the engine, and the higher the revs you have, the more power you have, and the more power you have, the faster you can accelerate. Kick down on an automatic, that's something that pops up in the theory test. Kick down is where you push the accelerator quickly to the floor. The car understands that you wish to accelerate quickly, and it changes down a couple of gears, kicks the revs up on the engine, and away you go. So kick down is where you go down gears to give you more power so that you accelerate faster. Lots of different types of gearbox, you can read that to your heart's content, I didn't want to go into that.